Hello and welcome to this session of Making Sense of Autism Raising Awareness. Today this will be a shortened version of this training as it is usually 90 minutes in duration. Today I'm going to try and bring it to you in 30 minutes. My name is Kerry Preece and I am currently the Strategic Lead Trainer for the Birmingham AET Hub. I work with the Communication and Autism Team as an Interim Assistant Service Lead, and together we have been using the AET materials ever since their fruition pretty much. The programmes of training and the autism competencies and standards, and more recently the Good Autism Practice Principles, are an integral part of our core service delivery. We have a team of about 40 people, 40 educational professionals and teachers who go into the mainstream settings in Birmingham and use the AET materials to upskill the school staff, to raise awareness of autism, and to ensure that the schools themselves are developing capacity to meet the ever-increasing needs of that cohort of young people that we seem to be having increasing numbers of in our settings at the moment. So this is an overview of the programmes that are available to you. We are a training hub for all three programmes. We have the early years, the schools and the post-16, and have done for at least 10 years. And within each of those programmes you can find the standards and competency frameworks, and also there is access to a progression framework tool, which we'll come on to later on. Within each of those programmes of training, there are training. We have the Making Sense of Autism, which is tailored to meet the needs of those particular age ranges. We have the Good Autism Practice. This is a day's worth of training that is aimed at those professionals who work with the young people themselves directly in education. Then there is an extending and enhancing module that is currently in the process of being refreshed and revised. The whole programmes of training are currently in process of being refreshed and revised with a view for the new materials being available at the end of September. And finally, the Leading Good Autism Practice. This is a module of training that's specifically for those agents of change, those that are in a position of being able to make changes to policy and practice within school, so namely SENCOs if they're on the SLT, and those that head teachers, assistant head teachers, that again would sit under the umbrella of the inclusion team or senior leadership team. We have the complex needs and participation, which is a module of training that's aimed at specialist settings, and again that is as a module that can be taken up by settings individually, and in order to do that you would need to contact your nearest training hub. The information of those training hubs is available on the website, and alternatively you can get hold of the regional leads, that's Lisa Downs or Lynn Byatt, and both of those ladies will be able to give you information on your nearest training hub. The aim of this training is for you as practitioners to develop your understanding of autism. We know through the all-party parliamentary report on autism in 2017 that many practitioners, teaching practitioners, weren't confident when supporting young people with autism, and this is a programme of training that is designed to facilitate some understanding which practitioners can then build on through the other programmes of training. As you can see here, we have 4 aims or outcomes that this training is designed to address. So your understanding of the 4 key areas of difference, knowing the importance of understanding the individual pupil and the profile of strengths and areas for development, understanding that the importance of building positive relationships, and indeed then the final aspect of this first part of making sense of autism is that you have an awareness and understanding of how sensory and communication differences present in the young people that you may have in your setting. Throughout all of the programs of training and all the modules, there are 4 key themes as listed here. The opportunities to do activities, to look at diagrams where good practice is outlined, to link to some websites and to discuss some case studies, features through all of the training programs and modules. So this first slide mirrors one of the principles of the AET, where we focus very much on a difference, not a deficit. And Christine Brakey here talks about how we should be thinking about these young people and embracing their difference, focusing on what they can do rather than what they can't. We also know it's a lifelong condition that relates to the world around us and how people communicate with one another. In the full version of this training, the opportunity to view videos of young people with autism talking about their experience are available to you, alongside numerous case studies that complement the experience of the school or the delegates as they are accessing the training. We encourage our delegates to bring to the training their own experiences of autism and discuss and to reflect on the pupils that they have in their settings. So in this section, we again think about how it's a spectrum condition, and there are opportunities there, as you can see, to access some of the case studies and some videos that open up discussion about possible parallels that you may well be able to see with young people in your settings. And a little bit of statistical data where possibly in your setting you may be thinking that 1 in 100 is slightly outdated, and that you yourself have a number of children on caseload that demonstrates that 1 in 100 is different. We know that there are 4 times more likely to be boys than girls that are diagnosed, but myself personally in Birmingham, working in schools, know that girls are coming more onto caseload, and that isn't just in the secondary age where the dynamics of the relationships tend to change and expectations increase. I am also seeing an increase in those younger young ladies from nursery beginning to be diagnosed and coming onto our caseload. This slide here is more instrumental and probably the key slide for you as a setting when you're participating in this training. We talk about the 4 key areas of difference, how these 4 key areas are what we are likely to see when a young person with autism is diagnosed. They may present in very different ways, as we know they do, because once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. But we think about here and think of examples of how we know that interaction is different for our young people, how they relate to one another, and the intricacies of the social relationships that might be presented in our settings. Alongside that come the communication aspects. How are you as the practitioner needing to communicate with your young person? Is it through visual means? Is it through gesture? What are the difficulties that they find with communication? Not understanding facial expressions or gestures, not understanding how thoughts and feelings are different from each other. And so those intricacies of those social relationships and the way in which we communicate, we have an opportunity to think about in more detail there. Similarly, we think about sensory and sensory processing when we think about young people, how they can be hyper and hyposensitive, and processing information, how they process their information when in school, and how they might have special interests and how we might utilise those in our learning opportunities in our settings. If we move very quickly on to building relationships, again, this is a quote from Luke Jackson. He talks very much about here the difficulties that young people face with interpreting that social use of language, body language, facial expression, and how that for teenagers potentially, that is like interpreting ancient hieroglyphics. The hidden curriculum around those social interactions, those hidden rules that very often we are faced with in our settings, that we intuitively pick up as neurotypicals, is a big piece of work for us in our settings to try and support and to facilitate understanding as they're moving through our settings. So interpreting those situations that like personal space and eye contact and what we should and shouldn't do may be instrumental in how effective our young people relate to one another in their settings. Similarly, these are expectations that we expect of our young people, that they understand personal space and they understand use of eye contact. But actually, sometimes we need to teach these skills specifically. So as we move through, we consider what that might look like for our young people in school. It's important for us as practitioners to understand our young person's profile of autism. How do those 4 key areas of difference impact on our young person that we might have in our setting? So you understanding what the key 4 areas of difference are is crucial. Understanding how you communicate with your young person, how sensory sensitivities may impact, whether there is a processing delay and how they learn best, whether it be visual or kinesthetic or auditory, and whether they need support in certain social situations. In order for us to know that, we need to build our relationships. Our relationships with these young people are key, and you in those positions in school are able to do that. Throughout the presentation, there are some diagrams, and again, for the purposes of today, I won't be clicking on any of those. But what those diagrams will do is bring together discussion points that over the training you will talk amongst yourselves, having groups, and think about how you support those positive relationships within your setting and how you as practitioners and adults in your setting facilitate that two-way communication. Parents are an instrumental part of the building relationships within our settings. Parents are those people who know our children best, who know the children best. And we need to find opportunities to listen to them and to work together. And again, throughout the training in that 90 minutes, you'll get the opportunity to work together to discuss how you work together to build those relationships with parents. Curriculum and learning. Curriculum and learning gives us the opportunity to think about the academic curriculum and the social curriculum. Here we've got a fantastic quote by Jan and Luke, okay? And as he says here, and as you can read for yourselves, you can be the cleverest kid in the world, but you won't get anywhere in life if you can't have a conversation. For people like me, on the social and emotional education is much more valuable than an education one, an academic one. In this section here, and in more detail in the other programs of training, what you will find is that the opportunity to look at the progression framework. The progression framework is a tool that's available on the website, on the AET website, free to download, that gives you the opportunity to look at those outcomes that are non-academic. And in doing that, you are looking to support that young person moving forwards into their academic career, but also beyond that into their working life, and to build those opportunities with potential employers, with social relationships outside of the school grounds. We know as practitioners that early intervention can make a huge difference, and getting that right support at that right time helps everybody involved. Having everybody, the team around the pupil, right from having them in your setting, means that both parents, pupils, school staff are all working together to support that child's needs. And the earlier we can put that intervention in place, then hopefully the more settled they become and the easier it is for them to reach their full potential. But in amongst all of this, we need to be able to see the pupil as a partner and developing that pupil's strengths. As I said right at the beginning, we're focusing on a difference, not a deficit. We're focusing on the positives and the strengths of that young person. What are they good at? How can we build on those strengths? How can you integrate those strengths into your teaching and learning opportunities? We must also challenge the stereotypes. A young person who is in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 might be extremely articulate and able to speak to large groups, to give their opinion, but may struggle in PE or in creative subjects where they can't dress themselves. They find that particularly difficult, or they also might find activities outside of school difficult, like crossing the road and making their own bed. Those are examples, real life examples of very articulate adults with autism who I've had the pleasure of hearing speak, but at the same time require support to cross the road, to do their shopping, to do their washing. And this is where we would consider that uneven profile. Again, at this point, we think about learning opportunities, how some of our young people do struggle to engage with the curriculum as it's outlined in the National Curriculum document. The flexibility for us as practitioners can be quite tricky, but what we have got are those children with a talent, with a particular strength maybe, with a particular special interest. And in having those special interests, what you have then got is a key that can unlock learning and motivation and engagement. And you need to be honing in on that and to be making those part and parcel of the learning opportunities you provide in your settings. At the same time, when we're planning our learning opportunities, what we also need to do is encourage our children to be more independent. What systems can be in place, what interventions can be in place, what strategies can be in place that will enable our children, our young people, to engage at a level they feel comfortable with, that will be able to develop those skills, those independent skills. And for us as educational professionals and adults in schools, to be able to know when it's important to step back away from those young people to experience those times of independence, and at the same time know that they are able and feel comfortable to have a go with to be independent, but also that will allow them to make mistakes but feel comfortable enough to then come back to you as the adult, ask for support and to try again. And finally, we have enabling environments. Again, what this quote does is highlight how busy everything is in schools for us. We know that the pace of education is very quick, and we also know that there seems to be lots of agendas going on for everybody. And as it was pointed out in the building relationships section, a lot of those hidden rules and expectations mean that the school environment can be tricky. The actual physical school environment also means that at times this can be challenging. The sensory overload of a particular environment can also prove challenging. And so what we've got here is a quote that reinforces that, the busyness of everything and how it can be quite difficult to work out what is going on. So as I alluded to in those 4 key areas of difference, the sensory differences of a pupil with autism can mean that they experience high levels of stress and anxiety. We know with the current pandemic that the restrictions to accessing school may have heightened a young person's anxieties and stress. Coming back into those settings where the bubbles are set up and maybe have smaller numbers of young people, where they might actually have to access different spaces, means that stress and anxiety is heightened, and that for our young people to move into a state of sensory overload or become overwhelmed is more easy than it might well have been previously. And so we may come across young people who are able to remove themselves, but we might, as practitioners, need also to be aware of when a young person is experiencing this stress and anxiety, this sensory overload, and be able to guide them to a space or a place where they can calm down and remove themselves. Furthermore, in this section, we look and consider transition. We know that our young people like routine and structure, and we know, again, with the current pandemic, that this has proved challenging because sometimes the pupils have been in school and sometimes they haven't. So preparing the structure in your environment, what does that look like? And again, there is a diagram that would be explored in more detail, but is that around designated areas, particular visual timetables, visual materials that are in place in your school to facilitate change and to enable our young people to feel comfortable with change. It's important for us to listen to our pupils and to observe our pupils. So again, it couples with the building relationships section here, where I'm asking about opportunities to listen to your pupil, opportunities to observe your pupil. How are they interacting with your learning environment? And what reasonable adjustments need to be in place for them to engage more fully in that learning environment? We have a video in this section that again is used to facilitate discussion amongst the delegates. Finally, one of the last slides here, a statement, a quote. Inclusion rapidly turns into exclusion if you insist on fitting that square peg into that round hole instead of shaping the provision to fit the needs of the pupil. If your setting works well for pupils with autism, it's likely to work well for everyone. And I can't stress enough that that second sentence on that slide is indeed true. If you embed the good autism practice and quality first teaching, then everybody benefits from that way of working. And as practitioners, we need to seek to make those reasonable adjustments for our young people rather than expecting our young people to work within the framework that we as neurotypical people are expecting them to follow. We have to be flexible and we have to adapt our settings. And so a summary of this training is that key for us to be flexible, to adapt, to think about how you listen to those key stakeholders, the family and the young person. Using those 4 key areas of difference, think about your environment and the world through their eyes. How can you adapt your curriculum to encompass the social curriculum? And how can you as a setting ensure that you are embracing the differences and that you are are enabling those young people to have a positive impact. And what I will leave you with here is a slide with some further details. Okay, what you have is the Autism Education Trust website, where you will find downloadable free copies of the progression framework, the autism standards and competencies, the local authority guidance that Birmingham produced based on our core delivery model, some guidance for parents around choosing appropriate settings for their young person, and the Tools for Teachers toolkit. And there is a range of other free downloadable resources for you yourself as schools and practitioners in setting. If you do have any further inquiries, as I've said, please contact Lisa Downs at the Autism Education Trust or Lynn Byatt, myself, Kerry Preece, at kerry.j.preece@birmingham.gov.uk if you wish to have any further information on what Birmingham offer. And alternatively, you can access our resources around transition and any COVID resources that we put together part of the pandemic at the Access to Education Birmingham/CAT website. But please do look at the range of materials and book on to any training, or contact your regional lead for further information on training that's available within your hub. Thank you for listening.